Hi there, this is Fabricio Gomez, and as part of our project, we are going to create not only audiobooks but also videos to help you analyze different elements of the texts that we will be recording. This time, I will give you some ideas on how to interpret the plot in literature, and I will do that using the short story The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. So let's get started. The first step to analyze the plot in a piece of narrative literature is to comprehend the story. To do so, you have to pay careful attention to different elements in the story, like the characters, the way it is structured. For example, it can be divided in chapters, and the relevant events that happen throughout the story and how they affect the characters. If you are reading a short story, you might want to read it a couple of times. Now, if you are reading a novel, you might want to read each chapter several times. Once you are familiar with the story and the events that occur throughout the story, you ask yourself two questions. What is the conflict in this story? And how does the writer present the problem between the protagonist and the antagonist? By conflict, we understand the opposition of forces, that is, protagonist against antagonist. Now, in The Lottery, Tessie Hutchinson is the protagonist, and the lottery itself is the antagonist. So, now that you have identified the conflict, you have to recognize the stages of the story. In literature, most stories are divided into 5 stages: the exposition, the rise in action, the climax, the fall in action, and the resolution. So let's go deeper into each stage using the lottery to exemplify them. First, we have the exposition, and this part of the story introduces the major fictional elements like the setting, characters, style, and others. In the exposition, the writer's focus is on building the world in which the story's conflict happens. In the lottery, the exposition begins when the villagers gather in the square. The story begins with a sense of liberation, as it says that it's a beautiful summer day, the children are out of school, and the villagers have begun assembling in the square to hold a lottery. It is unclear for us as readers what the prize of the lottery is going to be, and the mystery persists throughout the story. Clearly, the scene has been set for future revelations, which is what the initial situation is supposed to be about. Then we have the rising action. The rising action explores the conflict up until its climax. Often things get worse in this part of the story. For example, because someone makes a wrong decision, the antagonist hurts the protagonist, new characters complicate the plot, etc. While this part of the story explores the conflict and complications, the rising action should also investigate much more than just the story's plot. In the rising action, the reader often gains access to key pieces of backstory like the characters' motives, the world of the story, the themes being explored, and others. In The Lottery, this stage happens when Bill Hutchinson gets the slip of paper with the sign on it. Then his wife protests. This is the first evident moment of conflict that we see in the story, as Tess Hutchinson disagrees with the result of the lottery. The entire Hutchinson family, Bill, Tessie, Bill Jr., Nancy, and little Davy, are called up to the box. Then Mr. Summers puts 5 slips of paper into the box, including the one Bill Hutchinson had been holding when he was chosen. Then we have the climax. Here, the story's conflict peaks and we learn the fate of the main characters. A lot of writers enter the climax of their story believing that it needs to be short, fast, and full of action. Now, while some stories might require this style of climax, there's no strict formula when it comes to climax writing. Think of the climax as the turning point in the story. For example, in the lottery, this stage begins when each member of the Hutchinson family draws a slip of paper from the box. All of the papers are blank except for Tessie's, which has a black dot in pencil on it. Then we have the falling action. Now that you have passed the climax, which is the peak of the story, it's time to move towards a more satisfying conclusion. In the falling action, the conflicts and problems of the story should come to an end and they should start being solved. For example, in the lottery, Tessie begins to scream, saying that it's not fair, it's not right. Then the villagers begin to pick up the stones they had gathered earlier and form a circle around Tessie because they want to get over with the lottery before noon dinner. Finally, we have the resolution. The resolution is the end of the story where writers tie up the final ends and bring a happy or tragic ending. In the lottery, this happens when Tessie screams, then someone hits her with a stone on the side of the head. Then Old Man Warner urges the villagers to keep on hitting her. Finally, the villagers descend upon Tessie with the stones, and the story concludes. In conclusion, remember that to identify the plot in a piece of literature, you have to first comprehend the story, then recognize the conflict, and finally, identify the different stages throughout the story. And that's all for this video. We hope that you liked it, but most importantly that you learned how to analyze the plot in literature. Have a good one. Bye.